Hello everyone, how's it going? This is Jason from Stray Basilisk, back for another coding/development stream. First of all, I have to say it is incredibly super hot today, so I'm going to try not to make this go on too long, maybe a couple of hours. That's why I'm dressed like this. If you see my curtain flapping in my face or my fan in the corner, or if you hear that, then that's why. It's kind of intolerable. How is it where you guys are at the moment? So what we're going to be doing today is continuing with a little project we started last week. So we'll give a few minutes for people to kind of turn up. But in the meantime, I'll kind of do a quick recap of what exactly this is. So basically the project is a kind of faction war simulator. Hey, Wakanario, welcome back. How's it going? Yeah, so I'm just going to kind of do a quick recap. So the project was this faction war simulator, whereby we have this map like this, and right now we have two factions here, and as you can see, what they're kind of doing is that they're slowly spreading their influence kind of over the different bits of territory in this map. And then when they meet at a border, there's some kind of like back and forth battle thing going on where territory can switch hands back and forth. So you can see it looks like the green is slowly kind of gaining territory on the yellows now. The reason we're doing this is that it's kind of a bit of R&D for the Steamhounds project. So Steamhounds is a turn-based tactical game, and we plan for it to have this multiplayer faction warfare kind of mode, where what we're simulating here is kind of going to be how the large-scale like multiplayer system works for the players, right? Hey, Lolozino, I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce your name. Lolozino. How's it going? Welcome back. Yeah, were you here last time we did this? Anyway, I'm kind of giving a quick recap now, so hopefully it all makes sense. Yeah, so this is kind of a proof of concept for the actual multiplayer mode in Steamhounds. We're kind of just simulating now, like battles going on and this territory changing hands, but in reality, it'll be players inside the game who pick one of the factions, and as they do battles, the more they win, the more they'll kind of be gaining territory for their faction. You know, maybe they'll be making choices like, you know, if I'm on the yellow faction, maybe I get to choose which of these sort of neighboring contested territories I want my wins to go towards taking over, if that makes sense. Or maybe I want to kind of station myself here so that I'm all about defending this tile, or, you know, put myself here so I'm all about, you know, getting back territories from the greens and so on. And yeah, the point of this is it's kind of an exercise to allow us to play around with different sets of rules for this whole multiplayer faction game. You know, and there's also questions like, you know, how many factions should there be? How big should the map be? How many bits of territory should there be? You know, how long should it take for a bit of territory to change hands? How many battles should that require? There's so many little things and knobs and dials which we can tune to kind of balance that and make it feel good for players, and also for it to work as like this large-scale game. And our ultimate objectives really are for, I suppose, yeah, to give people a reason to talk with each other outside of the game and actually coordinate with other members of their faction, right? There's not much good having a faction game if all you ever do is just think about yourself and you just play and win as many battles as you can. You know, it's more useful or it's more valuable if it creates a sense of community in these factions and they have reasons to, like, you know, maybe they want to focus down and take over a particular bit of territory, so they coordinate on Discord or something and make a plan to do things in a particular sequence. So that's kind of what we're trying to facilitate with this. But we also want there's kind of two conflicting things we have to balance, right? One is this large-scale faction-based thing has to be meaningful, but then also an individual player should feel like their contribution is meaningful as well. Like, you know, we have these bars kind of going up right now, which represent the amount of influence each territory has in a faction, right? So if you look here, you see the yellows fill this up, and then they kind of, this territory becomes neutral, and then there's kind of a race to fill it up again to take over the territory. So it's kind of flicking back and forth right now. But if you win a battle and it creates a tiny little uptick in your faction's influence, you know, or you can't even see it, then that doesn't feel super good. But then on the other hand, if these territories are changing hands like super quickly, like every couple of minutes, then that's kind of too crazy and it doesn't feel like a faction war. It just feels like a mess, to be honest. So yeah, we kind of need to balance these things to work that out. You know, and then maybe it even depends on the number of players, right? Like maybe if there's 100 players taking place in like one season of the multiplayer game, then we need to have these parameters tuned one way. But if there's 10,000 players, then maybe we need to like dial things back so that each individual battle that's won or lost has a smaller influence, or maybe it kind of breaks the faction game otherwise. Yeah, so really there really are no right answers, and this is kind of now just, we've got this baseline system working, and it's now kind of a toy that we can experiment with and try different rule sets and additions on top of this to make it more interesting. So what I think I'm going to try and do is explain like what's actually going on right now and kind of how... Can we see both of these at the same time? Maybe not. Okay, so I had trouble with my drawing tablet before. I think it's fixed and all working today, but we will see. So the way it's operating right now is that each territory has... So there are two factions in it to begin with, right? We have this blue faction, and we have this yellow faction. And I think somebody suggested last time we start them in opposite corners, which seems to make sense. And then in each... okay, so first of all, their home territories are kind of locked, right? Like blue will always own this. Yellow will always own this, and it can't ever change. Like this is where their headquarters is, basically. And I think there's a good reason for that, which is that it means that a faction can never be totally wiped out. They've always got a chance to make some kind of comeback. Because if this is a big multiplayer game and players are choosing a faction, if their faction gets completely destroyed, then, you know, what do they do then? Do they just pick another faction? It's kind of weird. So we want to keep them alive and give them a chance to like gain back territory. But then what happens is that each faction, each bit of territory kind of has a little progress bar, and it has a separate bar for each faction. You know, and every bit of territory has these two bars. And what happens is, if a faction owns this bit of territory, it means they're able to try and expand into any of their like neighbors, like that. And then basically what happens is each kind of turn of the simulation, their bar will fill up a little bit. You know, the next turn it fills up a little bit more, fills up a bit more, and then at a certain point, the territory becomes theirs. So now this is the blue territory. Same thing with the yellow. They can... So initially each faction can start spreading around like this, and it is quite simple. Where it gets more complicated then is when, let's say, maybe the yellow faction's expanded, you know, all the way to here, and now owns this block. Now the yellow wants to sort of take over this faction from the blue, this bit of territory, sorry, from the blue faction. So the way that works is that the yellow start filling up their bar, and when it's filled, this territory is kind of basically reset. It becomes like open again, so nobody owns it anymore. So right now it doesn't turn over to the yellows immediately, but now the bars are kind of both reset to 0, and now it becomes like a race for which faction can fill up the bar the quickest. So let's say the yellow fills it up some, the blue fills it up some, and the yellow just manages to beat them. It's like, okay, now this is yellow, the bar's reset again, and now the blue will need to fill their bar up the whole way again, and then it becomes free, and then, you know, then it's another race. So that's kind of how it works right now. So if I flick back over to the thing here, we can probably see that happening, right? So let's pick one to look at. Okay, here, this yellow is trying to... Okay. What's a good example? Okay, here the green is... Okay, the yellow's filling up this thing. They fill it up, it becomes open. And now they're racing to see who gets to claim it. And in this case, the green claimed it back again. Yeah, so that's kind of how it works. There are a couple of other little features which we added, which was suggested by viewers at the stream last time. The first one is we have the idea of a rebellion, which is kind of cool. So what happens is, say the green owns this bit of territory, you can see that their influence in that territory is actually like slowly ticking down. And what happens is that when your territory is low enough, there's a chance every turn that the territory will get lost. You see it just happened here. If we watch this one, eventually, yeah, the green are going to lose control of it. and now they need to kind of fill their bar back up again to regain control. This is really interesting because it has a effect of kind of balancing things out, or what you might call like a rubber banding effect, right? So the way we've set things up in this simulation, the green team has like more players than the yellow, and they're just generally like a better faction. But you'll see that it isn't always the case that the green just takes over everything and just hammers down the yellow. What actually happens is there's a bit of back and forth, and that's because when the green becomes dominant and they own loads of territories, it also means that they have more of their territories end up getting into this rebellion situation. And when that happens, they need to then spend effort to kind of regain their territories, which gives the yellow a little bit of a chance to like push their border forwards as well. So it creates this like a bit more of a back and forwards, even if the factions aren't like totally balanced, which I think is a really nice property. Yeah, maybe there's more things we can play around with in relation to that. Okay, so yeah, I think also before we get on to adding new features to this and playing around with different rules and stuff, I'm going to quickly walk through the code as well to explain how this all fits together for anyone who's new. So I have actually cleaned this up a little bit. So if you watched the stream last time, I've added a few comments and reorganized things slightly just to make it a little bit more tidy. But the basic thing that we do is we go through and so I'm using a tool, by the way, called P5JS to do this, which is a tool made by the Processing Foundation. It's a really nice open source kind of JavaScript framework which is focused on making it as easy as possible to get graphics and stuff like that up and running. If you watched one of the earlier streams, you may have noticed that we were using like something called processing instead. This is kind of the JavaScript port of processing, more or less, and the reason we're doing this in JavaScript now is because I like the fact that this runs in a web page, because ultimately I kind of think it might be cool to add it into the Twitch overlay as like a little mini Twitch game or something as well. So I'm kind of setting ourselves up for maybe being able to do that in future as well. Yeah, so kind of back to the code. The first thing we do is that P5JS will always call this preload function first thing of all, and in that we load a background. Let me take a look at the files here. Yeah, so we have this background image, which is just the map, and then we have a load of, you may not be able to see this super clearly, a load of little images for all the territory pieces. And those are what kind of get overlaid to create this effect right here. Yeah, so we load all of those images, and then in the setup we kind of make sure that our little window here is the same size as our background image. So that's all this does. It creates a canvas for us the same size as the background image. And then what we do is we kind of initialize this data structure with all the information about the territories and the factions. So I'll kind of show you that here, and I'll also... okay, yeah, so let's kind of explain what's in here. So each faction has a name. They have their own color, which I'm just specifying here with like red, green, blue values. They have a home piece of territory, so each territory has like an ID number, which we'll kind of get to later, and we're also specifying how many players there are in this faction. So the church is this green faction, and they have 300 players, where the industrialists have, it's like that yellowy color, and they have 250, so this is why the green faction is slightly stronger. They've basically just got more players. So that's all the information we need to know about a faction. And then for each territory, we are storing some basic information, but quite importantly, we need to know if this is territory 0. And it's important to know that its neighbors are 1 and 17, because this is how we decide which territories a faction is allowed to kind of expand into, right? So if I own territory 0, I need to know these neighbors so I can figure out, you know, where I can expand. We also have the center position, which just kind of tells us like visually where we need to draw this bit of territory. We also keep track of who owns each territory, and that, you know, kind of just determines which color is applied to it. So it starts off with nobody owning any of the territories. And the 0 through 22, they correspond to just 0 through 22 on this image here. So that's that. So then in the setup, we put another little bit of information into each territory. We basically add this influence map inside, and what this influence ends up looking is something like, the church has like 50% influence, the industrialists have like 25 or something like that. So this loop is just a way of sort of setting that, initializing that to 0 for everything. And these numbers are what you see, by the way, in these bars. So these go 0 to 100 for each faction. So that's literally kind of visualizing that information there. So we start off every territory with no owner and like no influence from any faction. And then what we do is we go through and there's a special case for like the home territory of each faction where we say, hey, I should own my home territory and I should start with like 100% influence there. So that's the kind of setup. That's effectively like the data structure which represents this whole thing we have going on. Oh, I finally figured out there's a way to view this side by side, which could be nice. And this is maybe a bit cut off, but actually maybe I can fix this for us all. Cool. I feel like that. Yeah, that's close enough. We can now see the code and the map as we go, which is nice. Yeah, so this is where the actual simulation happens, and we have a little variable here, so I can specify. So I should probably say also P5.js will call this draw function once every time it updates. So every frame this gets called. Then we do the simulation, which is where everything kind of gets updated. I think I'll explain this after I kind of get into how the stuff is drawn. So the first thing is we draw the background image. That's quite simple, just kind of effectively clears the screen as well, because it gets drawn on top of whatever was there in the last frame. And then all we do is we loop through all the territories, and if no one owns them, we don't do anything. If somebody does own them, then we kind of draw the image for that territory at the correct position, and we tint it with the color of its owner. So that, that takes those images like that, and it kind of colors them and draws them in the correct position over the top there. We also have a little debug overlay, and that's actually just what we're seeing here with these bars. So I can toggle that on and off with the spacebar. There's just a little function down here somewhere. Ooh. Yeah, which kind of toggles that on and off for us. We also have a little safety stop function, so if I press Q, then it will kind of stop the simulation. Sometimes it makes this editor go kind of slow and janky, so it's nice to be able to like pause that while still leaving it open. Yeah, so that's how we draw everything. So then kind of talking about the simulation. And by the way, if anyone has any questions or this doesn't make any sense, or you just want me to explain anything in more detail, I'm super happy to go deep on explaining anything that's interesting to you or that doesn't make sense. Yeah, so into the guts of it, right, which is this simulate function. So the first thing we do is we apply this kind of decay and rebellion effect, right, which basically means that, again, if we watch this and we look at one of these places, we'll see that even though yellow owns this, their influence is like gradually going down over time. And when it gets low enough, there'll be a probability every turn that they lose control of this territory because it's due to rebellion or something like that. So that's where we do this, right? We kind of just subtract a bit from the influence, making sure it doesn't go below 0. And then if it's below a certain threshold, which I think is like, what is it? I think it should actually be 5 makes more. Yeah, I think I was off by a factor of 100 there. Yeah, so if it's below a certain threshold and a random probability is met, then that's where we will kind of lose ownership of that territory. So we set its owner to null, we like zero out the implements and so on. Yeah, so that's what applies there. And then each faction gets to kind of grow and spread. Okay, Macanario has an idea. Let's check this out. So one of the ideas I want to share is redesigning how to fight a neutral zone. When some faction starts to conquer a territory, it fills a bar just like it's now, but in this case it's a shared bar. Has a neutral color. Ah, okay. Let me check this image out. Yeah, so one thing that it would make sense for us, I think, to improve is how exactly this gaining of territory works. So, okay, so this would start like gray, is that what you're saying? So gray is like the neutral, and they're both like coming in from either side, and then when it's... That's a neat way visually, by the way, to represent that they're filling this bar up. I really, really like that. When it's filled up, it means, okay, they've like overcome like the people there, and they sort of gain control of it. I think this is nice. Like, one possible issue is that this only allows 2 factions to be doing this. And ultimately we probably want like 3 or 4 different factions in the game, so maybe there's a different way like we need to visualize this, but this is kind of a cool concept. Yeah, and this is totally the kind of thing I want to play around with on this stream. Yeah, so how it works right now, kind of in relation to that, is we have this... Basically my idea is that we would implement different strategies that different factions could use, and right now they're using this even spread strategy. And all that means is that a faction will look at all of the neighboring tiles, which it doesn't yet control, and it will put equal effort into like trying to fill up its bar in those things, you know. So it's kind of in a messy state right now, but the yellow's, you know, trying to take over all of its kind of surrounding factions. So all this code does here is it builds up a list of like who are all my like neighboring factions, and then it kind of works out how much total influence it has, right? In reality, this would be based on the number of battles that the players in that faction were winning. But for the purpose of this simulation, we just apply a sort of random number multiplied by the number of players. And then that gets divided evenly between all those neighboring factions. So, importantly, what this doesn't do now is it never attempts to support filling up the bar in a bit of territory that it already owns, right? So, for example, the green is always trying to conquer the things on its border, but it's not putting any effort into preventing rebellion inside its own borders, for example, right? So another territory we could play around with, perhaps, is another strategy for these factions we could play around with is, what if they put some percentage of their effort into like maintaining their influence over territories which they do own? Would that make them more successful or not? It'd be kind of cool to actually have a way to like score and track this stuff over time, so we could actually have these strategies fight it out and find out what's really most effective. But yeah, so yeah, so I think there's two main ways we could go. Okay, what's Macanario saying? Firstly, it's filled with the grey, then both factions start to conquer it, and then start fighting each other. Yeah, I suppose that's kind of happening right now. The difference is that it's not that they're working together to kind of conquer it like that, but it's whoever gets there first makes it neutral, and then it's just a race. So what I kind of think might be another way to improve this is if somebody turns a territory neutral, right? Like, for example, if the yellow fills up this bar, then this territory is going to become neutral. But the green and yellow are now start again on equal footing, trying to gain it back, right? How about if the faction who turns it neutral gets a bit of a bonus in the race to then take it over? So they've got a reason to try and do that. I feel like that would be especially important if there's more than 2 factions, because if 3 factions are fighting over something, then your best strategy is actually to leave it alone until somebody else makes it neutral and then just rush in right at that moment. And maybe that's fine, because that's a strategy people will have to coordinate and execute. But it kind of feels unfair on the person who put the work in to make it neutral. So I think the first little tweak I want to try is giving a bit of a bonus to the faction who like made something neutral in the first place. So I kind of want to add a constant for this, something like so let's say 25% for now. Then we could do something like, so this is the bit of code which handles the case where the faction has changed hands. So this is the case right now where whenever the bar gets filled up, everyone's influence gets reset to 0. And if it was empty to begin with, then we get kind of full ownership of it. Otherwise, it's totally neutral. But I think the way to apply this effect we just did is something like this. Just play this out quickly to see how it looks. So what I'm expecting is that if there's a fight between factions on the border, which we should see happening now, right? Okay, so here, when the yellow faction manages to fill up, okay, it's kind of going quite quickly, so it's hard to see what's going on. Okay, green's going to fill this up, okay, and they start at like 25%, so they have an advantage, which means they almost always, but not necessarily, will then go on to like win over that territory. I think this is kind of interesting. I'd be interested to see if this makes a dominant faction even more dominant, right? So previously green was somewhat dominant, but the effective rebellions meant that it was evened out a little bit. Seems like we still have that kind of effect here. Okay, we're seeing a similar kind of quality, I think. I feel like this feels a bit fairer in that the person to start to win over a place has some benefit in then going on to capture it. I think in reality, things would be a bit more interesting because the factions wouldn't always, all the time, be consistently outputting the same amount of like power, because it really would depend on who's playing at that moment and how many battles they're winning. So right now it's like if I turn a territory neutral, like yellow's about to do here, they will like pretty much always then go to take it over. Except, oh, actually no, the green did win it back there, so yeah. Okay, I feel like this is kind of giving us something. So I'm interested, Macanario, in what are you hoping will be the effect of this, you know, this thing with the neutral like grey area. What do you imagine will be the effect of that? I suppose it simulates like having to deal with the basic population there and sort of win them over, but I'm interested in this situation, right? It's like are these factions like working together to like beat down the common people? Is that kind of what this represents, or did you have another idea for this? Is it supposed to kind of represent something in like kind of the story of what's happening, or is it more about having a gameplay effect which you think is like beneficial to the simulation, just like mechanically? Yeah. So I think while we think about that, I kind of want to extend this strategy to be a little bit more intelligent. And specifically, I would like... Yeah, it's the people, right? Okay. I feel like that does actually quite well fit with the like theme of the game, that these factions are kind of trying to like win people over, or, you know, maybe more accurately kind of stomp them down and sort of gain control. So it has some nice flavor to it, I think. I do think one thing I kind of want to add is the idea of factions being able to put some of their resources into maintaining their control and preventing rebellion. And the way I kind of want to do this is, so right now there's this even spread, right? Which only applies, so the yellow right here, it's going to apply its influence. Oh, okay. Some zones struggle better than others. So that's a really good point, right? Is like, okay, I think that's it. Let's make a list. What are we going to try and do? Because there's a lot of ideas which we could go on to. So, number one, which I think is really kind of... Let me zoom in here. I feel like it's more or less necessary, is... put it like upkeep. Which basically means like trying to maintaining influence over territory you already own. My tablet's gone super weird again. So I think this is the problem. I definitely turn this off, so what's going on? Okay, the idea of trying to maintain influence. And then the next thing, which is your idea here, is some way of having territories I'm writing really slow because it's doing this weird thing where it's trying to join lines together. So territories have different properties, or different strengths, or different resistances. What's going on? Okay, that's barely legible. But this is kind of in the spirit, I think, of what you're saying, right? Which is some zones struggle better than others. But the point being, if a zone is harder for somebody else to take over, or easier for you to defend, then it's kind of more valuable in a way. So that adds more strategy to the system, because you've now got a reason to go for one territory over another, beyond just like where they're positioned and what they connect to and stuff. So, okay, first of all, I want to kind of apply this upkeep, and rather than creating a whole new strategy, I think I'm going to kind of add some parameters here. I think I'm going to call upkeep ratio. Upkeep threshold. And I guess this is now like even spread and upkeep. So my idea is that we still need to do this, right? We still need to figure out territories we're going to expand into. But we're also going to build a list of territories we want to do upkeep for. And all this will do is we're going to say go through every list, in fact. Put this into a list. Territories for upkeep. And what I'm going to do is saying, if I own a territory, if its current my current influence is less than some threshold, right? Then this is gonna be a territory I want to do upkeep to. So for the greens right now, maybe they've already built up a list of places they want to expand, right? They want to expand here, probably here, 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 all the ones kind of neighboring their edges. But then anyone that's within their territory and below a threshold, they are also going to want to do upkeep. So maybe, obviously, this is really low. That's going to be below their threshold. So it's that. Maybe that one's not. That. Maybe that one is, right? So then I'm going to spread their influence over in some ratio between trying to expand and trying to do upkeep on my territories here. So I think all I'm going to say is if my influence so looking at the influence by my name is less than oh, actually that was a property of this function, less than upkeep threshold. Even give it a more verbose name. Then we're going to add it to this list of places we want to do upkeep for. Okay. So there's a couple of cases I think we need to account for. So this ratio is supposed to decide like how much of my influence goes towards upkeep versus expanding, but we also have the case where, let's say there's nowhere to expand into, or let's say there's nowhere to do upkeep. In that case, all of our effort should just go into like the other one. So we've got a few cases here, right? So if they're both 0, then we're just going to return because there's really nothing we can do. Otherwise we're going to say if okay, so I guess that's kind of going to be the default case, right? So the upkeep ratio is just whatever it is, and the expand ratio is going to be whatever's left over. But if there's nowhere to expand, then we're going to say expand ratio is actually 0 now. Upkeep ratio is 1. Otherwise, if it's kind of the other way around, I'm sure there's a more succinct way I can do this. It's going to be 1 and 0. Hopefully that makes sense. So if there's both options are open to me, then I'm just going to divide it according to this parameter that was passed in. Otherwise, if only one of these things is open to me, I'm going to put all my effort into that corresponding one. So in the case of expansion, then I need to do times that. Prevent a little divide by 0 here. Similarly for upkeep. It's going to be ratio. Okay, does this make sense? Kind of just running through this again. We build up a list of all the things on our neighbors, and in fact, let's use this, kind of screenshot this actually and use this as an example. Yeah, this is kind of a nice example actually. Let's pretend we're the yellow faction in this case. So we're going to build up a list of places to expand into, which is everything on our borders, right? So it's going to be this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one here. And then places to do upkeep. This one is like it right at 0, so that's clearly below our threshold. So we have one, yeah, okay, that totally makes sense. So then if we've set our ratio as like 10% upkeep, then 10% of our influence is going to go straight to this, and 90% is going to be spread evenly into all of these. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, then we need to make sure that when we call this, we actually give it the right parameters. So to try it, to begin with, let's just put 0 towards upkeep for the church. Then have the industrialists put, let's say, 25%. And maybe the threshold is, say if it's below like 50%, then they should try and do upkeep. And if we haven't introduced a critical bug, this should hopefully do something for us. What we should notice is that while these are above 50%, all of their effort's still going into expansion, but when it gets to 50%, we get an error. Okay. That makes sense. Okay, line 236. The problem is here. Okay, let's have a look. So probably we passed in the wrong thing when we called this function. Hmm. Logging here, unfortunately, I believe it's probably going to be awkward to use a proper debugger in this web editor. Cannot be properly industrious if undefined. So I think the problem may be okay, I should probably be putting the territory rather than just its number into that list. Pretty sure that's what's happening there. I can't tell whether this is doing what we want or not. So in theory, when this drops below 50%, green should be putting effort into trying to keep it okay. So I guess what I could try is making this like super high, so if anything needs upkeep, we put all our effort into that. Okay, this is not doing what it's supposed to. What's going on here? Okay, this makes sense. They're just both expanding to begin with. So I think I saw that flicking over occasionally. I would expect in this situation they're full on upkeep, so something's going wrong in our little thing here. There's going to be something super obvious, or like a missing bracket, or something else weird in this logic here. Because at this point, for the industrialist, the expand ratio should be 0, right? Because this is 1. Yeah. And something. Yeah, and this kind of flicks back when it realizes there's nothing to do upkeep for. Okay, so we're seeing this occasionally, but like not every frame. Which would make sense if we were pushing things back over the threshold, but then we're seeing stuff drop back down here. Okay, cool. Let me know if you come back. Yeah, so this is really weird that it goes through several frames, not detecting this as needing upkeep. Right now, in my mind, most of these should require it, so... If I make this 100, then pretty much everything should need upkeep all the time. I think the problem is here somewhere. Okay, what's going on? Oh, okay, something weird's happening there. Okay, I think the issue is they keep kind of reconquering their own factions and becoming neutral in a weird way, so... Also, I was looking at the green instead of the yellow and getting totally thrown off by that. So... yeah, in fact, it will only change hands if... it's not already owned by the person who's... Yep, I think that will probably do it. I was getting totally tripped up and thinking it was an error in some like really basic like if statement or something. It's weird how you get into these loops sometimes and you think, oh, it can't possibly be that, right? Yeah, this looks correct now. Let me get rid of this, and I'll put these at 0, and I'll put these at 25% for anything under 50. Let's see how this looks now. Get rid of all this logging. So if anyone's just joined, by the way, and doesn't know what the hell's going on, just give me a shout and I'll step back and kind of explain all of this stuff. Okay, this looks good. So it looks like the green is now not letting their influence drop below 50% in any one of their territories here. Which means that they're solid, right? They're not seeing rebellions within their territory, but they're also no longer kind of dominating the yellows in terms of getting territory. But then the yellows taking risks by letting their own territory be susceptible to rebellion, so at some point this will get lost. Yeah, and then the yellows kind of lose out. This is interesting. So now we can play around with simulating different populations of players in a way by tweaking these parameters. So maybe this is too safe, right? And like maybe if it's like, let's only ever put like 5% of our effort towards quelling rebellion. Let's only do it when we have a fairly low influence there. So this is kind of a more aggressive strategy now. So there's probably an optimal point here where the green will have like better performance overall. This is kind of a situation where just running like one simulation and visualizing it all is maybe not ideal, and what you actually want to do is skip over to running loads of these simulations one after the other, or like in parallel, and then just drawing a graph of how each strategy or different parameters for the strategy perform over time. That's a better way to get a sense of like which strategy and which tuning parameters are kind of actually dominant here. But it looks like the greens are doing pretty well here, right? They're really keeping the yellows quelled down for a long time. It looks like at some point these are going to start to rebel, and then maybe there'll be a turn. But on the whole, this is like a fairly stable... Yeah, there we go. Big flash of stuff there. So now the yellow's going to take back some ground. Nice. Yeah, this is interesting. It lets us play around with different stuff quite nicely. Hey Yuta, how's it going? So yeah, if you're just joining us there, I imagine you wouldn't be you're not the type to be silent in chat, so I imagine you've just joined us. So this is a good point to kind of do a quick recap of what we've added. So the main thing is that we've changed we've changed a couple of things here. The first one is that we have this situation where the yellow so yellow and green are fighting over this territory here. We have this situation where the yellow like fills up their bar, and then previously it would just like reset them both to 0, and then whoever filled up the bar again first would gain the territory. Now you can probably just about notice that when the yellow fills it up, you know, it gets to make it become neutral, it no longer resets to 0, it resets to like 25%. So if you put the work in to like turn a territory neutral, you then have a slight advantage in trying to claim it after that. Which means the dominant strategy is no longer wait for everyone else to clear out a territory and then like rush in to try and win it at the end. Whether that's ideal or not, I don't know, but we shall see. This time. Okay, yeah, tell me about this time. It is about to meme the whole Stray Basilisk studio, most likely. I won't say I'm looking forward to it, but... The other thing we added is, previously, so we added, actually Yuta, this was your idea, right, to have this idea of rebellion, where if you sort of lose influence in a territory, then like just happened to the yellows here, right? If your influence is low enough, then eventually a territory will become, you'll no longer own it, like as if the citizens are like rebelling. Yeah, just happened there. And but previously the kind of AI we've set up here would never do anything to try and prevent that happening. It would always be pushing on its borders and would be putting no effort into like keeping control over I don't want to encourage you, but it's clearly Andrew. He's got the beard. Where was I? You totally threw me off there. So, yeah, what happens now is that the strategies these factions use, they can actually put some percentage of their resources into trying to maintain their reach. So you see the green is actually losing influence more slowly than the yellow because they're putting a bit less effort into their borders, pushing their borders, and a bit more into like upkeep on the home front, if you like. So we introduced a couple of parameters here. So this one is they'll put up to 5% of their effort towards like doing upkeep, and they'll only care about doing upkeep on a territory if they currently have like less than 25% influence over it. So that's kind of how that works. So we were putting together a little list of like features to add. So Macanario's suggestion was territories having different properties, so that one territory might be more or less desirable than another. And I think that's a really neat thing to explore. So what I think I may do is add another property to these, which is maybe something like I don't know, what do we want to call it, like just call it strength for now. I mean, I suppose this could have loads of different stats, but strength will kind of do, I think. So could just give everything strength of 1 to begin with. Just gonna throw this into a nicer text editor to make this happen. Okay, so then let's pick a couple of territories to give more influence. Any more characters I can think of. Okay, I'm not super up to date on Harry Potter, so I read Goblet of Fire. What was the order of the books? Philosopher's Stone. So yeah, it was a long time. I read these in primary school and then kind of stopped. I think I watched the first film as well, but I was never super into it. But you've got Snape, right? You've got the teachers. Hagrid. Yeah, Draco, you got Draco already. That's kind of harsh on Paul. Paul's a really nice guy. I don't think he's a Draco, but I don't know. How did Draco turn out in the end? We'll see. Okay, so we've given each territory a power. Let's pick a couple to make them like even more powerful. I don't know if anyone has a favorite territory here. Draco was good, was he? Okay. So let's pick, I don't know, like 7 and 15 to be like super powerful. Oh, let's be even more extreme. And then how should power work, right? I feel like a simple way is just to say that we could just modulate the amount, right? So I feel like that's something which could work. Actually, I don't want to do it here because I maybe don't want the decay. I think the decay uses the same function and I don't want it to also get modulated, so I think I will do that. I'll just say divide this by t.power here. And for upkeep, maybe that's not an issue, so maybe it's literally only expansion where upkeep is kind of an issue. Okay. So what we should notice is like this one and this one. Actually, I kind of want to label these if they are more powerful somehow. Let's take an icon. Any suggestions for an icon for like a powerful bit of territory? Oh, barracks, right? That kind of would fit. Power. Shield. You may notice Steamhounds temporarily is using some of these icons. When you find this site, by the way, gameicons.net, and start playing indie games, you will see these all over the goddamn place. Okay, this will do. I think I kind of like this. Should be able to set the size. Is that right? I don't know. Just download it. Okay, we now have this little image. Shows that a bit of territory is like super powerful. Just call it strong. I just need to upload the file in here. Make sure we load it. And I think all I will do is draw the territories. And then I'm going to say territory power is greater than 1. And I'm going to draw our little other thing here. What was it called? Strong. Cool. See how that looks. Nope, did not like that. I probably forgot to close an if statement somewhere. Yeah, in here, okay. So now, okay, they're kind of big, but you get the point. So these territories are now like stronger than normal. They take longer to take over. It's a heat wave, all right? Don't blame me. So what we should hopefully notice is when territory goes back and forth between people, these are just more kind of stable, and so they're more valuable. I think it might be interesting if I put one nearer to the yellow team so they had more of a chance of taking over one, or even if I quickly made the teams of equal kind of strength. Looks like green's grabbing both of these. Close though. Okay, it's super hot and my glass of water is done, so I'm going to take a quick 5-minute break. I will be back shortly. Okay, we are back. Ita, where's this video? Like, where's this work rate? So, looking at this, it was annoying me, like where these icons are placed and how big they are. So, because I'm weird, I'm gonna scale these down and just fix the positioning a little bit. Hey Warwicks, how's it going? Yeah, Warwick, so are you just tuning in, or do you know what we're doing here, or should I kind of explain quickly what the hell's going on? Okay, okay. So what we're working on is a simulation of kind of a faction game. Of ultimately, this is something we're planning for Steamhounds, or it's going to help us make some design decisions about Steamhounds. The basic idea is we have factions here, which are shown in different colors, and then they have different territory in different bits of the city. And this is kind of how we imagine part of the multiplayer working, right? Where players in the game will pick one of the factions, and then they will, by winning battles, they'll be able to kind of gain territory for their factions, right? So if the yellow faction's here, maybe they can try expanding, into this empty piece here, or to try and take over this like green area from this other faction. And players will have some way of probably saying, if I'm on the yellow team, I'll be able to decide if I want to focus my effort onto like this tile, or maybe defending this tile, or maybe doing like upkeep in this place, so that every yeah, everyone's getting sucked into Oryx. Everyone's getting sucked into Yita's weird Harry Potter meme machine. It can't be avoided. Yeah, just embrace it, I guess. But the idea is that players will be able to pick where they want to kind of allocate their resources. Maybe they'll like plant a flag down or something, and then every time they win ranked matches, they'll be contributing towards, either defending or kind of expanding their faction's territory in that location. So this simulation, we're simulating a bunch of players and different strategies those players might have to try and work out what the rules of this faction game might look like. Yeah, so it's like we want the players to have a reason to like talk to each other and plan stuff outside of the game, like in the Discord or something, right? If it was just a case of join a faction and then just win as many battles as you can, then there's no reason to actually talk to anyone else in your faction. But if maybe the faction decides, oh, we want to like focus on this particular bit of territory, or we want to try and be balanced and have some people like defending and other people attacking and stuff like that, then we feel like it's more interesting. So this is a simulation which kind of simulates that like player behavior and lets us make decisions about things like how big should the map be, how many territories should there be, how long should it take to win a bit of territory, and things like that. So we've got most of the basic system working here. If I set this off, you should see, these factions begin to kind of expand their territory. Then at a certain point, they will meet in the middle, and territory will start like going back and forth and changing hands. Yeah, so green now has kind of taken this over from yellow. Looks like yellow just took that over from green. And right now these factions are kind of have equal power, so there's a bit of back and forth kind of going on there. So we've got this basic system there, this basic framework, and we're now thinking about what other features do we want to add on top to either make it more interesting or give players more like strategic decisions to make. The first thing we added is the idea of rebellion, and what this means is that even if you own a bit of territory, you'll see that the so if yellow owns this bit of territory, their bar is still kind of going down. And when their bar is low enough, there's kind of a chance every turn that they'll lose this bit of territory. Like just happened here, right? It's because the people get pissed off and rebel or something like that. So then they need to put work in to like reclaim that territory. And this is interesting because it's kind of a balancing factor, right? Like if one faction has more good players on it, then it means they get more territory, but then more rebellions happen. And then as they're trying to like reclaim that territory that they lost to rebellion, it gives the other faction a chance to catch up a bit and sort of even things out. So even if I have some options here to tweak the number of players on each faction. If I make the yellow faction like a bit weaker, like if I give them only 200 players instead of 300 and run this again, you'll see what happens initially is that the green faction will kind of dominate. And they'll start to, you know, steal territory from the yellows. But then at a certain point, rebellion will kick in, right? All these territories now, they're kind of becoming a liability because when these bars get too low, you know, the yellow is really hammered down now into this little corner. But at a certain point, the greens are going to start losing these bits of territory, and yellow will be able to like push back. Having said that, it may not actually happen now because we just implemented something where the green now has a more intelligent strategy where some percentage of their effort is going towards like doing upkeep of their territories to prevent that happening. So we have some like tunable things we can play around with to play around with that. So right now the church is putting up to 5% of their effort to like upkeep, and they're doing it whenever any territory has less than like 25 influence. So I could put this down to like 0, so they're not doing that, and it will kind of show how the rebellion works a bit more clearly. Yeah, Yuta, I will check out your masterful meme after this quick little demo. So yeah, the green will start to kind of win out against the yellows. Yellow gets pushed back and back and back. Oh, by the way, each has like a home territory which they can't lose because we don't want a faction to get totally wiped out. Yeah, but you see some of the green is going to start to lose some of their okay, again, it's not happening super well here. Let me also speed up the simulation a bit. Yeah, yellow gets pushed back. Rebellions happen, the green loses stuff, and that allows the yellows occasionally, yeah, like here, to like push back a little bit. So even though they're the weaker faction by like a third or something, they have occasional like flare-ups and they have a chance to like push back and gain territory, so they're not like totally dominated. So this is a nice like balancing factor, I think. The other thing we added is the idea of certain territories being more valuable than others. So this icon, which is kind of drawn in the wrong place right now, let me fix that. Kind of shows that this territory is stronger. It basically means it takes more effort to like take it over and more effort to like maintain it. So when territory goes back and forth, these become like more valuable points for people to aim for. Yeah, so these are the kind of things we're playing around with, ideas to like create more strategy and like make the thing more interesting and balanced. Okay, Yuta. Yeah, if it okay. Effective gingering there. Good work, good work. Yeah, so that's what we've been playing around with. I mean, your avatar was a meme anyway, so it's just memes on top of memes now. I guess that's how it works. Yeah, so I mean, if anyone has any suggestions for other like features that might make this system more interesting, that would be cool. It might also be interesting if we could like manually allow people to like somehow like manually get this stuff going. Another thing we can play around with is if I make the factions like equal in size, then we can play around with giving them different strategies and seeing which is more effective. Right, so right now none of them are doing upkeep, they're just all pushing full force like to try and expand, and then they're letting their things go to like rebellion and then just fixing that problem when it arises. But by tweaking these parameters we can have them actually trade off like a different balance between things like that. So it might be kind of cool to keep like a running score for each faction. Guess I could just put that inside the factions. So for each faction, give them an initial score. And what we could do is every time we simulate, we could kind of give points to the factions based on how many territories they own, something like that. So after their little strategy applies, kind of want to loop through these territories. I'm just going to give them 1 point each turn for each territory they own. So if the territory owner is not null, then I'm going to say I'm going to increase their score, and then I kind of also want to draw the scores like in the top left or something like that. Just do this kind of manually for now. Draw text kind of in the top left at coordinate 1010. Something like this. Ooh. Mr. Bracket. Oh, okay. Text goes first. It's not super visible. Kind of draw a little box or something behind that. The thing is, I don't know if people want to play your game. I don't know if I should be just showing people memeified versions of people on stream without asking them first. Okay, this is interesting. So now we can see the ongoing score of these two factions. This tab. Okay, I will show this because it's pretty harmless, but I would check with her. There we go. Leave us smiling. Refresh this, you say? Excellent. Yeah, I approve. Cool. So, so we can see this playing out. So I think both factions have the same strategy going on, and it looks like their score. It's kind of like King of the Hill style scoring, right? Like every second they own a territory, they get some points for it. They seem to be going up roughly equally. So let's try giving them different strategies and seeing what's more effective here. So let's say the industrialists, let's give them a bit of self-preservation. So let's have them put 20% of their effort towards upkeep and see what happens. I imagine that initially their skill will be lower because they're not pushing as aggressively, but then they may start to take over as it becomes sensible to try and prevent this rebellion stuff going on. Yeah, so we're definitely seeing the church take an early lead there. Will they catch up? So this has an interesting implication on the length of a multiplayer season, right? Because at some point we're thinking that this thing will reset because one faction's going to get dominant, or like the number of players are going to get uneven or something. Yeah. Right, so maybe it's the case, right? It looks like the industrialists aren't really catching up. But if we drop this down, so maybe they only put like 10% towards upkeep, then maybe we'll see a different pattern. If this is super clear for everyone, by the way, I can. Maybe still too much. Yeah, so they're still lagging behind. So there's different ways to tune this, right? So we could have them put in more effort, but only when the rating is like really low. Okay, yeah, now the industrialists are actually winning out with this strategy. Interesting. So one thing I think might be cool is to kind of show a little graph of these points over time. So let's think about how we could do that. We kind of need to store all the data for this graph, right? So let's create a list of all that stuff. Then when we update the scoring, we could just shove it into that thing probably. Something like all we kind of want to store in here is an object with the points for each faction, so something like that. I think that should work. At some point it's going to get crazy big. Factions. Just shoving a load of data in this list is going to lag at some point, but we're okay, I think. Let's then draw the graph. I'll say something like I feel like we got room for that in like the bottom corner. So maybe it starts like here. Go through and draw every point of this graph. First we should probably draw a box for it. Okay, gives us a nice little space down here. Yeah, I did see it, Eater. So I still don't have the audio working like through the desktop and stuff. Let me pre-screen this. I mean, creativity points all the way. So you won't get the audio for this if you're wondering. It's a kind of screechy nightmare version of the Harry Potter theme. Probably distorted enough that we wouldn't get like a copyright strike for that, but also probably best that you don't hear it in the first place because that'll be fueling my nightmares later tonight. Yeah, it was almost deafening. It was I'm sure. So what I'm doing now, by the way, is I've got a list of all of these scores being stored, and I kind of want to draw like a line graph for each faction, because I feel like that would be an interesting way to show the kind of curve of how these strategies play out over time. And then if we wanted to maybe not visualize one thing, but like run thousands of simulations in the background and kind of chart their different progress, then the graph would be a way to do that. Okay, so to draw a graph, there's a couple of things I actually need to figure out first, right? So I've got my graph area that I know. So I'm going to want to draw a graph like with points, something like this, right? So there's a couple of things I need to figure out. I need to scale it to fit this. So I think the way I'm going to do it is, if there's like, 5 points, then I'm going to have those fill the whole graph. So it'll be those kind of graphs that, yeah, thanks, it'll be one of these kind of graphs where as it grows, it like squishes up. I think like that makes sense. Then the other thing is we need to scale. So that's scaling in this way, right? Which is just based on the number of points. The other scaling we need to do is based on like how high it should be, and I think the way to do that is we could either set a fixed scale, like if we know that like 50,000 points or something makes sense for that, then we could do that. Otherwise, we could scan through the data quickly, say, oh, this is the highest point, so actually we should scale everything so that this is like at the top. And I think that's the way I'm going to do that. Which means that I need to know a couple of things before I do this. I kind of need to know the maximum value in the graph, like of all points across all factions. So it's going to be at least 0. So for each entry, I'm going to say for each value within that entry, so kind of quick thing there, thrown together to scan through all these points and keep like a running total of, hey, or a running track of what's the maximum value we've seen so far. It's kind of a very common pattern for doing that kind of thing. We also need to know how many points there are, but that's just kind of the length of the list, so that's not a huge issue. So now we need to figure out where does this point sit, right? So I, in this case, is the index in the array. So the actual value is equal to that, and then go by the faction name. So the x is just going to be I divided by that length should work for us. And y is going to be equal to, so we need to know the height of this first, I suppose. So in fact the height is this. So since we're going to use this often, I'm going to kind of pre-calculate it, store it in a variable here. Okay, welcome back. What have you got for us? Yeah. Oh, interesting. You disappoint me, Yuto. Like, you're not living up to your reputation. I mean, the video is something, I suppose. Okay, so figuring out the coordinate of this point on the screen is kind of interesting. So we have our whole screen like this. We then have our graph area, which is kind of like here. And then we know, and then let's say the graph points are like, 1, 3, 5, 10, 6. It won't actually go down, but just for example, we know the maximum value is 10, so the scale is set here with like, this is 10, right? So if we're drawing a value of 5, we know that it's like halfway up this graph. If we know that this is the height of the graph, let's call it like GH, then we know that essentially this is graph height times, this point is 5 that we're looking at, 5 over 10. That shows us like how high up it is from the bottom, so it's actually like the screen height minus this. So that's the formula we're looking at. So it's going to be something like this, I believe. Then we can simply say vertex at x and y. And when we're done, we end the shape. Is that it? That might be it. I probably missed something fundamental there. Okay. Okay, what have you got cooking? Full cast, 100% original composition. You're making music for this. Do you make music, Gita? I didn't know this. Yeah. Okay, so I'm blatantly missing something here, probably. Let's log some stuff out. Oh, so this should in fact be... I need to scale this by... So they're stretched across the whole width of the graph there. Could be correct already there. Let's have a look. Okay, nice. I probably can't quite see this. This is exactly what I was hoping for. This graph now has a lot of points in it, and it's still not, my frame rate's still not tanking too badly, which is kind of surprising. Yeah, so this is showing that they went equally, and then the church's strategy pushed them kind of fairly steadily ahead there. No comment, Ita. Okay, we're drawing this graph and that does kind of work, that's kind of interesting. But the graph gets too big at a certain point and it is like slowly starts to tank my frame rate. So once we get hundreds of thousands of points in here, it kind of struggles drawing this. So this is kind of totally unrelated to the end product, but we could think about a way to optimize this, right? Or is this something I've ever done before, this exact problem? Maybe not. Maybe let's solve this and then I'll probably wrap the stream up because, again, it's super hot. So what we have is this graph, right? So we're adding points to it, and adding points, and adding points, and adding points. Over and over. At a certain point we're like, hey, this is too many. So one thing we could do is, my thought is, how about we simplify this by just getting rid of every other point? feel like that would do what we want to do. The only issue then is that would effectively like compress this graph back down. It would look the same, it would just lose resolution basically the bigger it gets. And I think that's kind of exactly how we want it to work. One issue then is we start adding more points, and now essentially the interval here is different, right? Because these ones that we lose, they kind of just get compressed away, right? So if this becomes like here, this one becomes like here, but then these ones, so the difference in time between these is like 2 ticks, but the difference in time between these is just 1. So I kind of feel like what we need to do is every time we do this crunching, we need to start adding stuff to the graph like more slowly, if that makes sense, right? So to begin with, every time around we add something, and then when it gets to a certain point, we crunch stuff down, and then we go, actually, let's now double this, right? So now we're only going to add something every second tick, and then it gets big enough, we're going to crunch it down again, and then we're going to do it every 4 ticks, something like that. I feel like that's a sensible approach on how to do this. Does processing tell us which... Actually, I was going to say, does the framework tell us which frame we're on, but I don't think this necessarily corresponds to that. Yeah, congratulations, Yuta. So okay, so the 7 dev team is the Soviet packing plant simulator, right? The Papers, Please inspired one. And then the mobile game is something totally different to that. So I think what I want to do is every time I add something to the graph, where are we? I want to say, I'm going to increment this counter. Then I think what I'm going to do is if, when there are like, I don't know, 1,000. This is totally a tangent, but this is kind of an interesting problem to solve, I think. Potato packaging, the Cold War posting experience. Nice one. When it's 1,000, we're gonna like crunch the graph down. By which I mean create a new array with like half as many things in it, or remove every other entry. And I think I'm going to do that by creating a new array. That seems more sensible. Like 0 is less than. I'm going to skip over 2 at a time, essentially. Let's say okay. In theory, we shouldn't really notice anything visually changing, so I'm going to log when this happens to make sure it actually is happening. So we're going to do that, and then we're going to say so what we also need to say is we're only going to add to the graph if yeah. See you, Ita. Take care, man. So we add to this graph at a certain point. It gets big enough that we crunch it down, and it goes to like half resolution. And again, yeah, okay, this seems to be totally working. Yeah, this is kind of neat actually. Now as it goes on, we're now at a point where we're adding, in theory, every time this happens, we've got an exponential thing going on here, right? Whereby, but it's sort of balanced out by the fact that we start adding stuff to the graph less frequently. So I think we are good, and this will kind of scale up more or less indefinitely. If we run this a few times, if we'll see different results. So there is a bit of randomness in the simulation in terms of how much influence each turn each faction gets. I feel like I need to add some more comments to explain the reasoning behind this. That's kind of something I'll do off stream, I think, before I post the code up. Yeah, but this totally seems to be working. Let's try again playing with some different strategies. Or even seeing how one faction having a different... Okay, here's an idea. How about a reckless faction with no... with a higher number of players against like a conservative faction, you know, who's using this upkeep strategy with like a lower number of players. Let's see how the graph ends up there. So in theory the church should win because they've got more resources here. But what I expect we'll see, yeah, right, like they're both sort of expanding, but then the green is overpowering them. We should see, when this rebellion happens, we should see the other like catching up occasionally. Yeah, it's hard to see. There was a little flare up there. Yeah, maybe the power differential is a bit too high. Another thing we could try is moving these like stronghold positions. And by the way, if you're newly tuned in, the way these work is that it just takes more effort to like take over one of these locations. If we move those right into yellow, would it give it a stronger footing, I wonder? To like 21 and 11, for example. One last thing. Okay, go ahead, Ita. He who shall not be named. Tea versus coffee debate. There's no right answer to that. There's no right answer to that. Maybe that already disqualifies me as a true Brit, right? Because I didn't just immediately say tea. I will say that I drink coffee every day without fail. Like in the morning, it's just part of my routine. I always drink coffee, but I also love tea, and I drink tea most days or like in the evening. But there are some days where I won't have a cup of tea, but there is not a day that goes by that I don't have at least like 1 or 2 cups of coffee. So what does that, where does that leave me? What if I drink like not regular tea? What if I drink like lemon tea or green tea? Oh. Okay. Kind of want to play around now with making this advantage like not quite so unfair. What I'm kind of trying to work out is, does having these strongholds nearby actually give you an advantage, and if so, like how much? Let me restart this. Actually, couldn't see the graph over here. Oh, that was super interesting. Yellow almost had a legit comeback there. Yeah, I mean yellow is kind of stuck here, right? Like they're not making a full-on comeback. I also kind of just want to move this text down into the graph, because why not? XP Pen Artist 22R. What is this? Oh, cool. One of these tablets with like a screen built in. That's nice. I have literally like the tiniest possible tablet, but it's actually kind of nice. Apparently this version like is kind of old. People like this. It's kind of hard to get now. Intuos Pen and Touch. It's kind of nice. I mean, but I'm not an artist though, right? I only use it for like scribbling diagrams and stuff. Yeah, I would love a big like screen that I could draw on, but yeah, doesn't say anything about me to that I have a little wee tablet. What was I doing? Yeah, I was adding this score rendering into here. So kind of want to put the faction name. Okay, it's getting kind of messy. This is definitely something I will clean up, but we're going through each faction and we are drawing their label and then drawing their little graph. Okay. Okay, that's kind of nice. Yeah, I mean, I imagine it's not actually possible for the industrialists to win this. We'll cheer for them in any case. Choose a London borough. Okay, I forget which ones qualify as a borough, but Westminster? I mean, I just picked a famous one. What does that say about me? Okay, Newham. What does Newham imply? I mean, that's fair, right? For Westminster, that's probably a fair characterization. Yeah, industrialists are getting stomped down. Let's put them on an even footing here. Hey, oh, that was close. Yeah. I'm interested to know if we rerun this a few times, would we always see the same result? Basically, is it like a chaotic kind of system here? So I keep feeling the industrialists, they could win this back, but it's almost certainly not going to happen. Well, I immediately think Elephant and Castle, but I don't know if it's actually a borough or just a tube station. It's not a borough, right? Can I look up a list of London boroughs? Is that permitted? Or is this like a knowledge quiz as well? Oh, okay, this is way more close actually. Turned away for a second there. Oh, I didn't realize Barking and Dagenham were part of the same borough. I assumed they were. I've heard people like listing them in boroughs, right? So I assume. Okay, what's my criteria? Is this just like? I thought there were separate places. I'm not insulting it. This is my own ignorance of East London. Yeah, like Industrious put up a fight here, but they still couldn't pull that back. I feel like I want to tweak their strategy. Choose one of the three. Hammersmith and Fulham. Let's go for that. That should be non-controversial. The other thing we haven't ever tried is adding another faction in here. I feel like it's kind of cramped to have three, but we could do that, right? First of all, this is kind of not great. We kind of want to do something a bit more generic there. Okay, what would have been the answer for Barking and Dagenham? Oh, alliances. Okay, that's interesting. Maybe we can play with that. So what I've been doing, I just did a quick Control F for like church to make sure I'm not hard coding anything else. All I'm specifying here really is which strategy they should use, which is fine. Which means I should be able to add another faction. Ita, give me a faction name. Who's faction number 3? And what colour are they? I want an RGB value, please. Anyone else? Whoever's first with that. I mean, that applies to a lot of places. Yeah, new faction. Okay. Three, 4, 5. 3, 4, 5 is not a valid. Max it out at 255, right? 2, 3, 4. Okay. And what are they called? And what's their home location? Bearing in mind the church was like here. sorry, the industrialists were here. And the church was up here already. $19. Okay, well, I'm really scared that that means something. You've just insulted me in Latin somehow. Or is this from the Conlang? What does it mean? That's a pretty impressive like reference to pull out. I just googled it and I'm getting like Roman texts and stuff. Oh, okay. Is this from like lump of? Let's do our Latin homework. Is this a Latin Harry Potter reference? Because that is okay. Kind of impressed. Potter, yeah. Okay, well, what's the Latin of like the Potters, right? Like as a faction. Like a plural, or like collective. And their home was 19. I'm going with my original. It's locked in. It's locked in. We're going with it. Misclick, ignore that. You know, they're kind of making a comeback here. I feel like they're catching up with the church, with the Greens. Add 4. You want another one? Okay. The other corner, I guess, right? 4. Let's do it. So they were in territory 4. Okay. I kind of want to move these powerful places to like 8 and 16 or something, so they can actually fight over them. Okay. I think we're good to go. So I'm kind of interested to see is like the green started off owning this tile for a long time, but now the purple has it. You can kind of see them catching up. Now the green has it again, and they're kind of beginning to pull away a little bit. It's interesting, right? Yeah. And I kind of want to make this like an overlay in the Twitch stream, so I mean, not that I want to encourage people to spam spam even more. Hang on, I kind of want to see where this goes, like whether Jason's Potter crew can take over. Come on, look at this. Yes, come on. Oh no. They're pulling away. Ah. This is real drama, isn't it? Come on. Okay, adding more factions is actually a great idea. This is way more compelling now. Okay, get thinking about the 5th faction and Okay, can be fully defeated. Interesting. Okay, well 1, 2, 3 is going to be basically black, so they're not going to show up on the graph. That is cool, right? Having them just pop up randomly. I mean, I don't know if it's applicable to the actual Steamhounds game ultimately, but I'm down with that. Kind of want to make the graph a little bit bigger. So, they have no home. So right now the way it works is if the influence is low enough, then they can break from their current faction. Like the tile, which is kind of the same thing, I think. It's the citizens like taking over, if you like. Okay, so it's a powerful, have this powerful faction. They don't have a home, so I think that will break some stuff sometimes. So then you wanted a random pull faction, right? So let's just do if so what's that, 1 in 10, 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000? Free for all and only one winner, yeah. I think it would happen quite quick. So that's actually okay. I'm gonna add this random faction in. Let's have them crop up to like 6 or something. Um, I don't think I can repurpose that code. Just say apply influence. Amount. Okay, I probably introduced a bug here, but I threw in this random Paul faction, which might appear randomly. Whoa. Well, there's Paul. Oh, they were as well. Can they eliminate Paul? Black Death, right? I feel like they're yeah. I feel like they're done. Yeah, I mean ultimately, right? Paul has like the Black Death has separated them all, so they're effectively all just fighting against Paul. Yeah, I don't think they'll ever beat him. Maybe I could make him a little bit weaker. We'll try that again. Yeah, nerf Paul. Paul OP. He's almost going. Yeah, he's keeping onto this stronghold location. That's well, it's okay. New color. But each faction has a home base, which can ultimately now be taken over. We have a little graph here which tracks the kind of points of each faction. And then we can just put them in different scenarios and have them battle out on stuff. Oh! Well, there goes Andrew. Paul will be back. Yeah, so the rules are now everyone starts in their own home territory, which have these like strongholds, which basically mean that it's harder for somebody else to take over. But there's a fifth faction who will randomly get spawned in, like occasionally, which is like a brown color, which you may see from time to time. Okay, yeah, it looks like these factions have reached like a steady. Oh, there's Paul, causing trouble. Well, the problem is, like, if they're gone, then they have no territory, so they have no way to claim that back, I guess. Like, I feel like they're gone, right? They're dead. Oh, and Paul's just wiped out everyone. That's it. There we go. You mean like so they can respawn, you mean? Is that what you're saying? Okay, yeah, we could do that. Yeah, this wildcard faction just destroyed things. Okay. So if we want them to be able to come back, then we would do that in a similar way to with Paul, I think. So we would say something like So there's the invasion of Paul, and here's going to be the respawn. So do something like and we'll do something like if so we call it home. So the faction has a home, basically, so if it's not this crazy Paul faction. And territories. And they don't own their home territory. And there's a random probability, so similar with Paul there. And then we're going to let them respawn. Okay, so that I believe will give us a respawn option. Let's check it out. There goes Paul again. Okay, so if we watch one of these, we should see a respawn happening eventually. Yeah, okay, the yellows respawn back in. Cool. I think this is working, right? This is kind of what we were talking about there. Paul running rampant again. It feels like the end state is kind of always going to be Paul just bulldozes everything. And then people will start spawning back and then just get stomped immediately by Paul. Okay, so it's getting kind of late. I think we're about done here. We have a nice little system going on. We have our factions battling for territory. We have the occasional spawning in of Paul. Speak of the devil, messing shit up. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with what we've done today. It's been kind of fun just playing around, messing around with the parameters of the simulation and stuff like that. So maybe next time we'll pick up another topic. I'll probably do another Twitter poll sometime next week. So let me throw our address in there. So I'll probably put another poll about a topic to cover. If anyone stumbles across this and is interested in the game or wants to take part in our tournament tomorrow, our Discord is the place for that. Aside from that, yeah, I will leave you with this little simulation for a minute.